Thank you very much, and ready for a panel that might be slightly controversial, but it's talking really about the future. When we talked about advanced oncology investment, we focus not on very advanced assets, but what is needed in terms to advance oncology to make big difference to patients that currently have a huge unmet medical need. And early stage transferring into the later stage really needs investment. And so some of the focus will be, how do we enable that investment to occur? What is required? And how do we build companies that will then have the assets that will make a big difference to oncology patients in the future? So with that, with my colleague Andreas Alnhofer, we'd like to invite the panelists to give a brief summary of their background name, and we will then continue with the panel. So we start with Ayla, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invite. My name is Ayla Hurl. I'm CBO at Disco Pharmaceuticals. Disco is a company developing next-generation bispecifics, both ADCs and T-cell engagers, targeting our own proprietary novel targets, which we've discovered using our proprietary platform, which systematically and with a very high confidence maps the surface of cells. It can map the surface of any cell. Our current pipeline has an oncology focus, addressing indications of unmet needs such as CRC, SCLC, and specifically looking into pan-cancer target communities with the underlying hypothesis that we are pursuing and gated bispecifics, and thus opening up the target space, ensuring ultimate cleanliness and higher efficiency. Thank you.
Hi there, I'm Alex Blythe. I'm the founder and CEO of Lift Biosciences. Lift is a unique company in that it's a cell therapy that works using neutrophils, so it's the only neutrophil-based cell therapy in the world. And we essentially correct innate immune incompetence, which is a major issue in cancer, but also in other neurological conditions, and also in longevity and autoimmune. And we do this by mass producing from donors with excellent immune systems. We take their stem cells and iPSCs, and we mass produce these neutrophil progenitors, and we then use them to replace the dysfunctional innate immune cells, myeloid-derived suppressed cells in patients. We're halfway through our Series A. We just won a monumental €12 million grant with the Irish government to run our first-in-man clinical trials there next year. And the company's on a fantastic growth trajectory since, despite it being tough times. So if you have something novel and it really works, this market still works.
Thanks, Alex.
Okay. Yes, good morning, afternoon. Hi, my name is Jake Campbell. I'm here with Lift Biosciences, where I'm the U.S. site head and involved in the corporate strategy. My background is I spent about 15 years or so on the finance side of things, mostly as a life sciences investment banker, working with companies both on strategic corporate finance, M&A. I also spent a couple of years doing equity capital markets work, so we're really just primarily focusing working with companies on IPOs and follow-ons. For the last 10 years or so, I've been on the corporate side, worked at private companies, all oncology companies, private and public, in capacities in business development, investor relations. Most recently, before Pilatus, I was the managing director and the head of the Clinical Etc. and Venture Fund at the Cancer Research Institute in New York City, a nonprofit that's been focusing on cancer immunotherapy research for the last 70 years. During that time, I was responsible for managing their clinical trial portfolio, as well as developing and building out a small venture effort, where we made 8 investments across 7 different companies. Throughout my career, I've worked on, 47 different transactions with an aggregate deal value of over $13 billion. Thank you.
Thanks, Jay.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for the invitation to speak here. My name is Marina. I'm the CEO of the clinical stage company. working with neoantigen-directed immunotherapies. We are based in Basel, so this is home turf, and it's really a pleasure to continue to attending these events. I just remembered my first Sachs meeting back in 2016, where I met some people, and that led to a deal, the first deal a year later. So a fantastic conference then and now. My journey here has been anything but linear. I'm a trained scientist. I worked as a consultant, then in a big pharma, then in venture capital before I joined Newscom and became the CEO about 6 years ago. And each of these steps has brought something to the table that I find very useful as I navigate the ups and downs of the biotech journey. Why am I here and why are we here? As Esteban said in his opening, we want to bring life-saving therapies to patients who need them. And for us, for me, this is not just something to say, it's really a deep sense of purpose. We have a quite unique possibility to change lives of patients in a really profound way, because we have found a way to target our technology to patients who have a very clear genetically predisposed risk to develop cancer with almost certainty, and we can do something about changing that course of their life. And the condition that we are tackling is called Lynch syndrome, and the indication that we are looking at is new. It's called cancer interception. So delighted to be here and contribute to these conversations, and thanks again for the invite.
Thanks very much, Marina. Paul, please.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you to be here today. Very nice to be with you. I'm Paul Bravetti. I'm the CEO of Brennus Pharma. We are a French company doing new modalities in oncology. We are doing what we call in vivo immunotherapeutics that can unlock directly and multispecifically the immune system of the patient with an off-the-shelf approach. Last year, we raised a Series A round about 23 million euro. And right now, we are in a really exciting time because we're just starting our first in-human study in colorectal cancer in metastatic phase in first line in MSS population. And we just got very amazing data, first promising data. So yeah, very interesting for this panel. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. As you see, we have a very broad experience in early stage. We'll have the opportunity now to Andreas will introduce the topic further, and we will start asking questions.
Yeah, so I'm Andreas Wallenhofer. I was more than 12 years in the R&D leadership of Roche, was then in different biotech venture funds involved in several exits. In the meantime, busy as a board director in different companies, actually beyond oncology, and very happy to be here for this panel. So oncology has, of course, always been for biotech a super competitive area. If one watches the dynamics today, it looks like that it is even more difficult to get investments. And so the question to the panel is, from your experience, how do you perceive these dynamics? What allows you to differentiate? And how you see how you can position your company to be really attractive for being fit for these large investment rounds that we see currently in oncology. Who wants to start?
What about Paul?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Yeah, actually, definitely the financing part is challenging right now, but I think it's not only for the oncology. I think as well there is always a delay between the VC point of view and the pharma point of view. I think we all have seen this last few days that oncology is one of the major topics, and just to see all the BD guys from oncology that are here today. I was actually last week with one of the two biggest investment firms in oncology. I mean, involved in the recent biggest deals that you would have seen. And so I anticipated this panel and I asked them some data about oncology and where is the status of oncology, for example, for pharma. So Here's the data. So oncology in 2025 was the top M&A topic. It was number one in M&A in terms of acquisition, in terms of volume, but also in terms of turnover. Oncology was still in 2025, and it was the case in 2024, the top contributors to pharma margin. So this is also something very important. And what they see is that 45% of the deals are done in oncology between preclinical and up to phase 2 studies. And they definitely believe this will continue because of the, for example, the cost pressure, the price pressure from the Trump's law. So there will not be big deals in oncology right now, but there will be smaller deals, meaning that it will be earlier deals as well. And they all need to anticipate the renewal of technology regarding the patent cliff, massive patent cliff that is coming right now in oncology. So I believe the future of oncology will be better, and the investment, of course, will come back because they will follow what the pharma is doing as well.
I mean, as Esteban said, we try to make this engaging and partly controversial. I'm currently involved with 2 clinical stage oncology biotech, and there I see a little bit an opposite trend of what you describe. So in these companies, we have many discussions with pharma, and typically the answer is, why don't you come back once you have solid phase 2 data? Very interesting, but we are not sure yet before you really can give us a full data set that we can move into full development. Right, it looks like that we are talking about 2 worlds here, kind of an innovation early oncology dynamic, and then the clinical reality where you better have strong investors who can finance these phase 2 clinical trials. Is that just my perception, or you see similar trends?
Maybe a few notes on this, because I started with Disco this year, and before that I worked for a family office and was also pursuing a lot of direct investments and looked at the space, so I can speak to this also from an investment point of view. I think it's a lot of it follows textbook knowledge, right? There are certain value inflection points that we all know that they will come, and we have to make sure that we're financed to achieve these certain value inflection points. And you don't want to, as a company, neither of us want to end up in some kind of local minimum of energy, let's call it this way, and end up basically running out of money, where we're in a position where we're going to be asked exactly this, right? So I think as long as you're in our stage, you're selling hope, you're selling excitement, right? You want to get to the next scale where you need to show some kind of in vivo proof of concept. As long as you're already in the clinic, you have to have a very, very clear readout. And once you're at the end of phase 1, I mean, if that data isn't exactly black and white and fairly clear, and it all depends on dynamics, markets, patent cliffs, and so on and so forth, and the specific therapeutic modality, it's going to be obviously really difficult to exit, right? But then also, this is from a partnering and exit point of view, and I think the same also applies to fundraising. But then again, in this very, very complex landscape of fundraising, and we also know that there are other therapeutic modalities, for example, cell and gene therapies, right? Which I worked with the Maddox for 7 years, so I know how on the both sides of the coin, and how the field is moving today. But then it's a difficult environment. But then you have companies, for example, like Trogenics, which just this week announced a 95 million Series A for a gene therapy in a neurological oncology disease. So I mean, everything is possible as long as you have a really very, very clearly defined pipeline and a clearly defined product, and you follow these value inflection points.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just to build on that, I think this mismatch that we're all really talking about between what pharma is wanting to see and I think what the VCs are putting money into really comes down to trends and technology leaps. So although oncology is still the main deal-making area, it's still the thing really driving the money, it is a high bar. And that's what really puts VCs off. And they're all wanting to Andreas's point, I hear the step before. I hear, well, once you've got this clinical trial done, Alex, well, we'd like to come in. I now know what they're going to say when we finish the clinical trial phase 1. They're going to come and tell me I want the phase 2, right? But I think this mismatch exists because so many have failed, and there's been technology leaps. We had CAR-T do very well in blood cancer and then fail miserably in solid tumors. We had bispecifics looking quite exciting. And then, and Summit's share price went through the roof. But then when it came down to actually how many people then survive their cancer, it was unchanged. And so we see these problems, and that then doesn't translate into money coming through because of this high bar. In our specific case, we deal with tumor escape. So that's what we're unique in being able to deal with, which kills 90% of patients ultimately. And I always struggle with why everyone's focused on the 10%, the targeted bit that in the end doesn't work, in my opinion. And when I go to talk to pharma companies, they recognize what I'm saying and they buy into it and they're very interested. But when you go to VCs, they don't seem to get it. And so you have these very disjointed conversations. So probably like everyone here, I use pharma companies as a pressure group. I bring them into conversations so that they apply pressure, and then the VCs are interested because the buyer is making all the right signals, and doing early deals and things like that. And that's what forces the hand. And I think that is really the differentiator in this market, whether you've got pharma companies coming in behind you or not, and that dictates whether you raise money.
Well, you have at least from my perspective, very exciting company with great clinical data. It looks like that you could ramp up for a pivotal trial. What are you going to go to do? Where do you get the money?
Yeah, that's thanks, Andreas. This definitely is close to home. When I joined Newscom, we were at the research phase without a clear idea of how to even develop a platform. So it was just figure out which platform you want to use and maybe get it to the clinic. And then it was, we need to generate some clinical data. Then after that, we need to generate more clinical data. And then now you need randomized data. So we have done all of that over the years. And the way on what helped on this journey is really building a coalition of investors who believe in your story, who believe in the data, and who are interested. Of course, exits are what drives investors and their returns, but fundamentally who are interested to build this company and technology with you and to make sure that you have the right support and the right people around you to enable that. The way that we did that was to always have very clear paths. I think Ayla talked about this a bit in her commentary. What are the steps? How are you going to make this real? Because stories are good in the beginning and you need a good story, but you need to start generating supportive evidence for that story and you need to show how it all builds up. And it's true, we're now at the point where we have run multiple actually phase 2 studies, and we have what I believe is exciting data, some published and some to be published. And we are having discussions about running a pivotal study. This is something I never thought I would do when I joined Newscom back in 2016. And again, the goal is, of course, to eventually hand it over to somebody. But my story sort of gives a picture of, building a biotech with increasing amount of confidence and conviction that is ready to tackle on even something like a pivotal study.
Jay, if
Yes.
a question to you there, from the observations I do, one company is in immuno-oncology, the other is in ADC. So basically, these are super competitive areas. Both have platforms, right? I observed that you find investors that are more asset-driven, that really want to go for the lead asset, and others who actually have more sympathy to really build a portfolio, right? And sometimes what you see in these boards is a little bit a struggle. What has now priority? Where should the money go? How you deal with that in your company?
Yeah, so I think just generally speaking, I think, kind of like the guiding principle or light should just really be focusing on patient outcomes. It's almost kind of like the saying, if you build it, they will come. So if you can really develop an asset that is going to make a meaningful impact on the patient's outcome, then I think that's really the goal. And I think in order to delineate whether or not how impactful you're going to be, you really have to have your head on a swivel to understand what is the current standard of care, what is the current standard of care going to be when you're going to get to the market, as well as then to make sure that there's a differentiation. Because even sometimes the most sexy technologies don't actually result in good commercial outcomes. Alex mentioned CAR-Ts. CAR-Ts are still only getting to about 20% of the addressable market because of the limitations of the administration being focused on the academic centers. So I think that's something you have to bear in mind is what is the ultimate outcome? I've been involved with conversation with the VCs when a company might be looking at the neoadjuvant setting, and the VCs just say, thank you, but we don't want to play there. To the question about asset-centric versus kind of versus a platform, I personally used to think platforms are kind of cool because if you can validate it with the first target, that gives you a lot of optionality and potential monetization, non-dilutive funding with your second and third programs. The challenge is I think sometimes in order to do a platform, you're investing in the platform versus advancing an asset. So in times of limited resources, and again, as everyone's been saying, clinical research is what people want, and people want to see the asset advance. So if you're investing in a platform, which isn't really necessarily moving as fast to the clinic versus an asset, that could be kind of a play. But then, conversely, there's some VCs whose mandate will only really speak to you unless there's a platform, because they realize that if the first one doesn't work, there might be something falling behind it.
Hey, Paul, what do you think about that from your observations?
Yeah, I think recently in immuno-oncology, we had some good example of the difference of valuation between monoasset and platform. So we got, of course, the story of Ezo Biotech bought by AZ for $1 billion based on phase 1 data. A few months later, we had the Capstan Therapeutics bought by AbbVie for $2 billion based also on phase 1 data. And 6 months later, we had Invertus bought by Kite for $350 million. So there were a big differentiation in terms of valuation. And one of the explanations was coming by the fact that they didn't have any platform behind the lead asset for Invertus. And from my perspective, when we speak about a platform, it's not a platform where you will disseminate and dilute your investment into a lot of development. This is not helpful. But when we speak about a platform, it's a platform that will support your lead assets, that will help you actually to reproduce the success if you have a success, that will help you to pivot if you need to pivot. So the investment you need to put in the platform need to help your lead asset actually to be valuable.
Yeah.
So one aspect about the lead asset, the question of the platform is important because, as you say, if you have a really novel technology and that technology requires you to develop the lead asset will require the whole CMC to be developed from assays, analytics, and manufacturing processes. And once all that is in place, the next one will be a lot cheaper because all that is developed. That would be the type of platform we're talking about, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and if I can just add to that, Nuscom is a good example of this because we do have a platform, but we also have a clearly differentiated lead asset that is in advanced clinical development. And I thought about this a lot, not just for this panel, but in general. And for me, it's almost like asking which of your children do you like better, right? Do you like your platform or do you like your asset? I mean, you kind of have to have both, right? Exactly for this point that you bring. We have an asset that is ready for the pivotal stage. We are still working on the platform improvement, on the technology improvement, because you can always do better. And it is absolutely true that you cannot just develop technology for technology's sake. There has to be a value, right? There has to be these building blocks of value that you are putting in front of yourself and showing to your shareholders, current and future, that leads to somewhere. But it is also true that knowledge that you have acquired, in our case, by developing new classes of shared or individualized neoantigens, or whether it's the way that you improve and really make your CMC process robust for the pivotal stage, those make all the future potential bets very compelling. And companies out there, they of course they buy data. This has always been true, but they also want to see what's coming potentially behind these data, and that's where you can really add value, as Paul was saying. If you can imagine this, imagine that, then you kind of sell a story and data at the same time, and that can unlock quite a lot of value.
For my role to put some controversy in this, in an exit where I recently was involved, we had two assets, one phase 2, one phase 1, right? And ultimately, when you looked into how the strategic partner who acquired the company, 90% of the value went into phase 2 asset. And so they got both. You could argue the second one more or less for free. In the meantime, both are doing fine. But the observation is really that for these acquisitions, at least some of the strategic acquirers, they primarily go for the lead asset and put less value in what comes after that. So just for the sake of provocation, what do you say to that?
I think that I can sign off of that completely, because this also comes into play when you do any kind of larger strategic partnership, right? When you're doing your valuation models and how much what is worth. So the observation is that very often the platform generates excitement, but at the end of the day, the price tag will be determined by your lead assets, or really when people go into very deep diligence. At the same time, there is this sort of difficult to quantify and measurable premium or effect that if you're, as Paul and all of my colleagues said, if you can actually, if this platform, whatever this is, right, what we're talking about, it's a very wide definition, can actually, in what point of way can it de-risk this lead program? In what point of way can it de-risk the development of follow-on programs? Be this, for example, that this platform enables the development of, for example, or the targeting of this target with different modalities, right? So if you look at companies like Disco, like Emetics, which I was now involved in, you see that all of these serve different types of therapeutic modalities and purposes, and this additionally de-risks, obviously, all of these programs. So as long as you can have some kind of discriminator, that is definitely helpful. But that your lead asset would eventually, if it's significantly strong, determine everything. And specifically, the more advanced you are, the higher this will come into play.
So maybe one of the issues there is perhaps the NPV valuation, in the sense that an early stage, early preclinical, for example, the Disco platform is a target discovery platform, just to say that. Target discovery is extremely important for innovation, but it's a long way from a commercial embodiment. And so that discount will be quite large, whereas if you have a phase 2 asset, you have a very clear TPP, you can make very clear assumptions about what the market is going to be, and then that leads to a certain valuation. Is there an element of truth to that?
I think definitely. I can speak to not only from the current situation at Disco, but I can speak from personal experience from my time at Emetics, where I spent 7 years, where the company went from preclinical to clinical to actually exactly what Marina just said, right? To where they're now planning for pivotal trials into a commercial stage company. And you can just see how the dialogues have evolved. And as late as when they went public, the companies end up only being judged by the lead assets, right? At the end of the day, and that determines also, that drives valuations.
Certainly, thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment just as far as the valuation. If you look on the public markets perspective and you look at any kind of analyst initiating coverage report, there's zero value ever to preclinical. So it is only when it comes to the clinic when it's easy to value. And plus, even if you were to try to value a preclinical compound, it's preclinical, the duration, the probabilities of success are against you, so it'd be hard to get a positive NPV. But just kind of drilling down a little bit more about on this topic. When I worked at Coltan Pharmaceuticals, which was not a platform company, but it was a company that was based on a deep knowledge of receptors tyrosine kinase. It was sold to Celldex Therapeutics for the oncology portfolio. However, because RTKs play a role in this whole immunology plus minus for autoimmune diseases, there was almost a footnote in the transaction for a little small KIT antibody. If you look at Celldex there, and the total deal value, I think, was a couple $100 million, obviously a lot of biobucks there. But if you look at the market cap of Celldex today, it's an immunology company predicated on that small footnote in that transaction, and it's now about $3 billion. So something about the asset side, it's not always necessarily a platform, but it's a really deep understanding of the pathway or the target. For example, Pilatus Biosciences, currently it's a metabolic checkpoint company. We're targeting CD36. There's a pipeline behind it because there's this whole novel approach of, the implications of metabolism and your immune system. So, platforms are great. Again, I'm a big believer in platforms, but also there's a deep, there's value to be added to or ascribed to having a deep understanding of a certain science or biology.
So there's something like an exit value when you're talking about an M&A or an acquisition, or when there's an exit value, and then there is not the exit, but the opposite, the coming in value, which would be what investors are looking for. And in a sense, that there may be a significant disconnect, as it has been pointed out by Alex, that you probably need a consortium of exit people to say, hey guys, you have to come in and put some money here, right? Any reactions to that? Yeah, Marina.
Maybe also reflecting on Andreas's question, it is true that everything that was said, I don't want to repeat, clinical data drives most of the value, but if the investors are convinced that a second asset, an earlier asset, or the platform has value that won't be recognized by the potential acquirer, and if they believe in it, then there is always a possibility to, spin that out and really bring that into your partnering conversation and say, okay, if you really ascribe all the value to this and you don't care about anything else, either between 0 and 10%, there have been successful stories of companies actually, selling their lead asset and then taking out the rest of the either portfolio or platform into a new co and then doing it again. I mean, we have an example, even here, Luca is not here, but he has successfully done that with both Theracon and Vectiv Bio. Not exactly a platform story, but the concept of saying, okay, if you don't assign value to something, it means that you don't care. So you don't care if I take it, assuming that you have supportive investors around the table, put a bit more money into bringing this to a stage where it will be more attractive to somebody and kind of extract value from both and maybe not at the same time.
I think that's a very interesting point, and we have been discussing some of the companies that if the divergence between your phase 2 asset and your research excellence actually becomes big, then the next question is, of course, what is your syndicate? Are they aligned on the same objectives? And spinning off an earlier asset becomes a viable option for value retention. So theoretically, it sounds very good. Practically, of course, it is something that you really need to build up with your investors up front because, as you can imagine, you have people who come in early, other people come in late. So the economic interests may vary quite a lot between the different parties that you have at the table. So I think it's a way forward, but it depends on the alignment of the syndicate and who you have in there, right? But moving maybe to a next topic is, so you have actually this dynamic we were speaking about, asset, platform, and you have to align and make the company fit for potential partnership exits. How are you going to go to do that, particularly if you have these two hats of platform and asset? How are you dealing with that question? Maybe Alex, if you go first.
Thank you. Yeah, we have a situation where our lead asset is essentially our platform. So it's a bit different because we're a new-to-world modality and all the license partners want to see that it's obviously safe. It makes the tumor hot like it says it would, and it does a whole lot of other interesting things that I can't say here. And that means that their faith really comes down to the power of the preclinical models. And I think this whole conversation we're having here is very oncology, because if you look at other areas, like I've worked in dermatology, for example, it's incredibly predictive using skin offcuts to predict what's going to happen in a patient. And so suddenly your preclinical assets can be very valuable. And I used to work with Allergan on this. And it's a funny thing in oncology that it's so complicated and we so really don't understand it, that we have this lack of faith that what we do in a preclinical model will play out in the clinic. But I think that's all changing with the the tumor chunk models and the tumor on a chip and the AI models now being used that essentially are making the human body something that is a lot more predictable and dwarfs mouse models. And so I think in the future, if you take those two pharma companies, which is what we do, and there are a number of pharma companies like Roche that actually back certain preclinical models that they prefer, and you turn up with their preferred preclinical model, they give you a good hearing on your platform. And I think that is the future for oncology, that we make it so those preclinical models, people have higher confidence in them, and that is then carried on through to VCs as well.
But there is a challenge in immune responses, because immune responses in phase 2 tend to be not really predicted by any animal models so very precisely. So I think really that is a very interesting challenge from the technical side. But it's clear that as clinical data emerges and models, that should change.
Yeah, and that's what these non-mouse model companies are doing. They're basically running clinical trials and comparing them to the data they got in their preclinical models, and more of them are coming out with 90% predictive power and things. And I think that will change everything. So I think the day of the mouse is going to be over, and we're going to have much better AI predictive models working off organoids and creating a whole sort of body composite.
So one of the questions really is about building the company and having the right management and the right syndicate to take you through the strategy to the exit, and having the ability to have the dialogue with pharma, to engage pharma partners early, and build that in that case. Paul, you had some comments about that. What is your view? How do you position the company to make it attractive and building it around those concepts?
It's a big question. It's a big question and a lot of possibility to reply. Maybe I'm a little biased because I spent 16 years in big pharma company at global level. So maybe I have this point of view, but I believe we need to become a mini-me as a biotech, meaning to show to the big pharma that in terms of structure, in terms of credibility, in terms of skills that you have regarding the team, regarding the people that are in our board, we need to be quite close to what they are and what they want to see as well. Meaning they want to see people that can actually deliver, that can have an operational excellence as well. Because if they want to invest in you, for example, as an early stage, they want to be sure that you will continue the project and you will make it valuable for them. So, of course, the team is very important. I believe also we speak about the platform. Of course, accelerating the platform is important because you can actually expand as well with extension of indication for your lead asset, for example, and so expand the possibility for them to tackle a bigger market. I think the thing is building the credibility of the company is very important to be well listening.
Let me throw in another aspect for this discussion, and that has a little bit to do. One of my roles is also to advise Clavis Bio, may not be that well known here in Europe. This is essentially the life science arm of Temasek, the Singapore State Fund. And in that role, we see, of course, a lot of Chinese company, right? I mean, the dynamics is fascinating, in a way also a little threatening for the Western biotech. And so the question here, and I think that's in particular about asset-driven companies, when you see with what speed these Chinese partners are able to move things forward, and also that very often they can create relatively quickly some clinical data, which puts again a question mark in the way that how can we move quickly? How can you actually get this clinical data? And is the benchmark, particularly for strategics? I mean, you see all the big pharma companies now shopping assets in China. Best with clinical data, while we are are struggling to get these data and have the adequate funding to create clinical data in Europe. How are we dealing with that challenge, and what would you say is the winning strategy?
Maybe just a couple of comments on that. I think the most important thing is that, you know, we all don't go down this rabbit hole of pursuing a Me Too approach, right? So I think that's one thing, which is maybe potentially very obvious, specifically speaking from, you know, the side of Disco, which are developing bispecifics, which is currently obviously a market which many of our Chinese peers are catering to. So definitely not going down both in terms of modality or, for example, in target biology through a Me Too approach. Because then I think if you actually do a specific, differentiated target biology and a very unique profile, which is authentically novel and cannot be reproduced either because of your process or, again, because of the identified target biology, then I think there is obviously always the necessity to be fast-paced and so on, but then one doesn't have to rush through a trial or just do anything superficial, because many of these reference trials, I would say the vast majority, not all, there's excellent science coming from our peers from Asia, right? And specifically from China, but I would say a very big majority, I mean, I've seen many data also as an investor, which is just very difficult to be reproduced and transferred, right? So I think besides the point of not following Me Too approaches and obviously, stating the obvious, having a very clearly differentiated IP, which is also protected, to ensure one does retain your own competitive edge. I think that's the key to success.
So novelty in terms of IP and barriers to entry and know-how. Jay, you wanted to say comment?
Sorry, just building on what you're saying about novelty and IP. I think another thing is know-how. So I think one of the things which would prohibit, someone trying to be a Me Too to you is if there's a particular know-how which, is not disclosed in the patent application. And I think just regards to sort of the Chinese, tsunami of sorts catching up on things. A couple of years ago, I was an observer on a board of a company that was, it was in the back corner when it was running out of money, and they were thinking about doing an IIT in China for an in vivo CAR T. And I guess this was like 2 years ago, so that was right before in vivo were in vogue, I guess. And I was actually kind of a naysayer back then, but I've heard now that people are able to get, a IIT in China from a cost and time perspective about 33% of what you'd expect elsewhere. And some companies are actually doing that not for clinical regulatory purposes, but just to generate data so they can go back to these VCs and say, you wanted human data? Well, here it is.
Maybe just a very quick comment. I think there are two things also in terms of the price tag which one has to discriminate with. On one hand is at what cost specific therapeutics can be manufactured, right? Which definitely can be done at a higher scale, at a faster pace and lower costs. But I think if we now very quickly pivot to sort of the price tag on the deals or the price tag on specific acquisitions, I think what we will see, which is potentially in the future, that these prices at some point, once the Chinese market regains a bit more strength, will potentially, increase after some period of time, because many of these companies which were acquired, no matter how good the data was, were also in this level of distress, right? And that's also what pushed some of these price tags down as well.
I can maybe add a personal story to this. I don't know how to crack the competition coming from China, and we're at a stage where you generate serious data, which means that you burn serious cash. But if I think back to Newscom's early days, we started with a 12 million seed round. It was called round A, but it was really a seed round. And that lasted for nearly 3 years. And I remember also in those days, we were standing and being compared to the big US companies like Neon and Gridstone and whatnot, and BioNTech before it became what it is today, who have invested hundreds of millions of dollars into these algorithms that were trained to find these super neoantigens. And in the meantime, we said, well, we believe that neoantigens can be found, and all of this is eventually going to look the same. What you really need to build is a different and better platform. And so we were investing in our technology early on, and also looking at places where the others didn't play. So I don't remember how many times I heard, you cannot find shared neoantigens, they're only personalized. And we did. And this is now the basis of our lead asset and our value proposition, which is quite unique. So it sort of speaks to all these comments that were made by my co-panelists on, how are you smart and sort of nimble and really focused on what you can do best, and not trying to mimic or clone or repeat something that others are doing who might be just very different, better financed in a different geography, etc.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, maybe one more comment on this topic. Definitely, I think if you have a new modalities, it could be very interesting to look at the Chinese market. If you take the example of bispecific, if right now you want to combine your new modalities with a bispecific from a big pharma company, they will tell you, no, we don't want, because there is 2 drugs in development and it's too risky for us. But if you go to China, they will have the same actually bispecific than the pharma will have. And then you can do like a clinical study there. It can be done fastly. The regulatory affairs, it's going quite fastly. And then if you have good data, you can come back to the pharma and you say, okay, I have almost the same asset in combination. Maybe we can speak again. And maybe just to come back on the patent, they evaluate, there is differentiation right now during these 3 past years regarding the patent approach in China, because they need to protect their market as well. So they have also now a national office that is using the same rules than the European office, for example. So we couldn't say you don't need to be careful, but at least there is improvement.
Yeah, if I try to wrap this up before I hand over to Esteban to close, I think one has to realize that certain modalities, bispecifics, antibodies, is almost becoming kind of a commodity that you can shop in China. You just give them the targets and they're going to go to produce this faster than in the past. So that's not necessarily the differentiator unless you have a new technology. The other is, again, from my observations with Temasek, and have the opportunity to talk to some of these companies. Forget the idea that these are kind of generic companies or copying. They have actually very excellent, often highly trained people in US and Europe. You're talking to CEOs with MIT degrees and Harvard MBAs. So this is a very, very well trained, highly tech affine workforce who is going to go to compete not only for copy but for innovation. But I think where it puts, and we shouldn't fear to compete for innovation. It's just the reality. I think where we need to think is about the speed, right? I hear Marina, and I think Nuscom has done a heroic job navigating for years with relatively little cash. But let's say our system, where you chase the CEOs to do seed rounds. As soon as they have done seed rounds, they have to go for Series A, and before they finish the Series A, they already have to go for next investments, rather than to focus on the company, is extremely timely consumptive. And I think that's also a reason for potentially these larger rounds where you secure quite some capital so that the company really can focus on execution and take the competition on speed with this new dynamic that we have to realize from this Chinese competition. So I think that's something food for thought, but I leave the last 2 minutes to Esteban to summarize his.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Thank you to all the panelists and to my co-chair Andreas. I think we have learned a lot in the last hour, and we have reflected on what it takes to make a success out of an idea or a project, to take it forward and really be able to engage both the investors and the late-stage partners. A couple of ideas really to get this pressure group of pharma is very nice. We've always talked about engaging patient organizations. That's also essential, but engaging a pharma group of peers to really help you take forward. That's great. Then really, what is a platform? We talked about platform, and that meant several different things depending on who we were talking. But really, the platform is a way in which you can generate multiple assets, and that is the value of the platform. And those multiple assets can really enhance the value of the company as far as they promote, offer the promise of improved therapy and clinical benefit in a relevant population. So I think the experience that has been shared by our panelists is very valuable when we think about creating other companies or new companies. And I hope that you share with me the gratefulness for having been here in this conversation, that you did not shy away from controversy. Thank you for that, and for sharing some insights and personal stories. So thank you, you all as well, for participating, and join me in thanking our panelists.